This is section 1.6, other types of equations. We are going to look at examples 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, and 9 in our book. All right, a rational equation is an equation that has a rational expression for one or more of the terms. Now, to remind you, a rational expression is the quotient of two polynomials, p and q, where q can't be equal to 0. Here are some examples of rational expressions. 3 over x plus 2, x squared minus 4 over x minus 8, 2x to the third plus 4x over x to the sixth, 2 over x. These are just examples of rational expressions. And what you have to remember when you have variables in your denominator is that they cannot be equal to 0. So when we're solving rational equations, we are going to have to be concerned about numbers that make our denominator 0. Those numbers are going to be called restrictions. Anything that makes your denominator equal to 0 is called a restriction. So for instance, if this were your rational expression, look only at the denominator. What is going to make that denominator equal to 0? -2, right? So for this problem right here, the restriction is that x cannot be -2. Because if you have -2 right here, -2 plus 2 is 0. And remember, you can never divide by 0. So every time you have an x in the denominator, you're going to have a restriction. Let's look at this problem. What is going to make this denominator 0? Right, 8. So x cannot be 8. That is our restriction for this problem. What about if you have x to the 6th power? What is the one number that will make this denominator 0? That number is 0. So x cannot be 0 here. As a matter of fact, the restriction for this one is that x cannot be 0. So part of the steps we're going to use to solve a rational equation involve finding the restriction for every one of our problems. Remember, that's what will make the denominator equal to 0. The next thing we're going to do is find a common denominator. The next thing we're going to do is multiply each term in the expression by the common denominator and solve the resulting equation. And then last but not least, we're going to check to see that our answer is not the same thing as our restriction. Because if it is, that means we have no solution to the problem, or we're going to have to throw that answer away. So let's try to follow those steps as we solve this example. All right, first thing, 3x minus 1 over 3 minus 2x over x minus 1 is equal to x. Look at your denominators. These are rational expressions. Look at the denominators and see if there is a restriction. Is there anything that x cannot be in this problem? Well, this one is always a 3, so that's not a problem. But right here, if we have x minus 1, the restriction is that x cannot be equal to 1 because that will make our denominator 0. The second thing we have to look at is finding our common denominator. The common denominator here is going to be 3 and x minus 1. Step 3, after we find our common denominator, is we're going to multiply each term in this problem by the common denominator. So I'm going to try to get a different colored pen. We're going to take 3x minus 1, and we're going to multiply it by the first term, which is 3x minus 1 over 3, minus, all right, we're going to multiply 3x minus 1 times 2x over x minus 1 equals, every term has got to be multiplied by the common denominator, so I'm going to multiply 3x minus 1 times x. Now, the reason we are multiplying by the common denominator is because we want to get rid of the fractions. We don't like fractions. We want to get rid of them. Since we're getting rid of the fractions, these denominators better cancel away so that we don't have fractions anymore. Now, if it helps you, you may want to put these over 1 since you're multiplying fractions and fractions together. And remember, you're getting rid of fractions, so this denominator better cancel. That 3 cancels with this one, and you are left with x minus 1 times 3x minus 1. Right here, this x minus 1 cancels with this x minus 1, and we're left with 3, and we're left with the 2x equals. Well, there are no fractions here, so there's nothing to cancel away. And just changing the order, we're going to have 3x times x minus 1. Now, this is a nice equation. It has no fractions. It ought to be something that we can solve pretty easy. So FOIL this out, get rid of your parentheses. X times 3x. 3x squared minus x minus 3x plus 1 minus 3 times 2x is 6x equals, use your distributive property here, 3x times x is 3x squared minus 3x times 1 is 3x. All right, we got some like terms we need to add together over here. So we have 3x squared, negative x, negative 3x, and negative 6. That looks like a negative 10x plus 1 is equal to 3x squared minus 3x. Now this equation looks like it's going to be quadratic, but if we try to get our 3x squareds on the same side of the problem, the x squared, the quadratic term, cancels out, and we are left with negative 10x plus 1 equals to negative 3x. To solve this, let's add 10x to the other side. So I have 1 is equal to 7x. Divide both sides by 7. And we get x is equal to 1 over 7. Now, the last thing we have to do is check to make sure that this is not the restriction. It's not. We said the restriction is 1. We got the answer as 1/7. So this is our solution because it will not make our denominator equal to 0. And we're assuming that we did all of our arithmetic correctly and it will check just fine. So let's look at another example. A rational equation. Note any restrictions that you might have. The only restriction we have is that x cannot be equal to 2 because 2 will make both of these 0. Next thing we need is our common denominator. Well, our common denominator is x minus 2. So step 3 is we're going to multiply x minus 2 times each term in this problem. So again, let me try a different color pen for our common denominator. I have x minus 2. I'm going to multiply that times x over x minus 2 equals x minus 2 times 2 over x minus 2 plus x minus 2 times 2. Remember, while we're doing this, we're trying to get rid of our fractions, so our denominators should cancel away. X minus 2 cancels with x minus 2, and I have x equals. X minus 2 cancels away. I'm left with 2 plus, nothing cancels here because I didn't have a fraction anyway, so I'm left with 2 times x minus 2. Use your distributive property. 2 times x is 2x, 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. Add our like terms. 2 and a negative 4 is a minus 2. Let's subtract our 2x to the other side. So negative x is equal to negative 2, or x is equal to 2. The last thing we have to do, check to make sure that your solution is not equal to your restriction. Well, look, we got x is equal to 2, but we said our answer could not be 2. That is our restriction. Since we got x is equal to 2 and we know x cannot be 2, this cannot work in our problem, and we actually have no solution to this problem. Here are some more examples. We have to get common denominators, we have to get restrictions. But if you'll look at these denominators, especially this one, x squared minus 2x, this one will factor. If any of your denominators are going to factor, you've got to do that first before you look at getting a restriction and your common denominator. So when I look at this, I see a common factor of x. I'm going to pull out my common factor, and this denominator is x over x minus 2. So the equation that I have to solve is 3x plus 2 over x minus 2 plus 1 over x is negative 2 over x times x minus 2. Now, what are your restrictions? For this right here, x minus 2, we know x cannot be 2. 1 over x, right here, we know that x cannot be 0. And for this one, we know that x can't be 0 and x can't be 2 also, because so these are our restrictions. The next thing we need is our common denominator. Our common denominator is x and x minus 2. Step 3, we're going to multiply everything in our problem by our common denominator. So we're going to have x times x minus 2 multiplied by 3x plus 2 over x minus 2. Let me just change that. Plus x minus 2 times 1 over x equals x minus 2, negative 2 over x and x minus 2. Remember, we're getting rid of fractions, so this stuff better cancel away. X minus 2's cancel. We're left with this x, and we're left with 3x plus 2. Plus, all right, this x cancels with this one, and we're left with 1 times x minus 2, which is just x minus 2, equals x cancels, x minus 2 cancels, and we're left with a negative 2. And all we have left to do now is solve this equation. Get rid of our parentheses. 3x squared plus 2x plus x minus 2 is equal to negative 2. Get your like terms. 3x squared plus 3x. If I add 2 over here, that's going to give me a 0. So I have 3x squared plus 3x equal to 0. You may either factor or use your quadratic formula in your calculator. If you factor or use a quadratic formula, you're going to get your same two solutions. If I factor, I would factor my common factor of 3x out. That's going to leave me with x plus 1. Setting my factors equal to 0, I got 3x equal to 0. Or I get x plus 1 equal to 0, so x is equal to negative 1. If you decide to use your quadratic formula, you have to pick out your a, b, and c. Your a is 3, your b is 3, and your c is 0. You put that in your quadratic formula, and you should get the same two solutions, 0 and negative 1. Again, these are possible solutions. Do they match your restrictions? Well, we didn't get 2, but we got 0 as a solution. So we have to throw this one away, and our only solution is that x is -1. Be sure and do that last step. Last but not least, again, look at the denominators. You're looking for restrictions. You're also looking for factor. This will factor. It is the difference of 2 squares, and it's going to factor into x plus 1 times x minus 1. So the problem that we have is -4x over x minus 1 plus 4 over x plus 1 is -8 over x plus 1 and x minus 1. Our restrictions for this one right here, x cannot be 1. For this denominator, x cannot be -1, and that is the same for these two. Your common denominator. Common denominator is x minus 1 and x plus 1. So that's what we're going to multiply times every one of these terms. So step 3. We have x minus 1, x plus 1, multiplied by -4x over x minus 1, plus x plus 1, x minus 1, times 4 over x plus 1 equals x plus 1, x minus 1 over -8, and our x plus 1 and our x minus 1 down here. Woo! Now, let's cancel these denominators. X minus 1 cancels with x minus 1. So we are left here with x plus 1 times -4x plus this and this cancel. We're left with a 4, and we're left with an x minus 1. This denominator cancels completely, and we're left only with a -8. Use your distributive property. -4x squared minus 4x plus 4x minus 4 is -8. Add your like terms. Well, -4x and a positive 4x are going to zero out. So we have -4x squared minus 4 equals -8. So we can continue to solve. We can either, it's going to be quadratic, we can either put it in standard form, or we could use our square root property. We haven't used our square root property for a while, so we might want to try that. So let's add 4 to both sides of the problem. That is going to give me -4x squared is equal to -4. Divide both sides by -4. So that's going to give me x squared is equal to 1. When you use your square root property, taking the square root of both sides, x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1. So x is plus or minus 1. Now remember, that is 2 solutions, plus 1 and minus 1. Possibly look back at your restrictions. The restrictions are plus and minus 1. We got plus and minus 1. These do not work. There is no solution to this problem. Now look at your ebook and look at problems 15, 19, 23, and 25. They will be worked like these. Remember to follow all of the steps and check your answers with your restrictions when you get finished.